All right, so welcome back, and just want to talk about some supplemental things. And the the primary thing I'm going to refer to is basically it's a textbook is called Crisis and Trauma Counseling, and it's published by Thelma Duffy and Shane Haberstraw. But the reason I picked this to begin with, and like I said, it's no longer in print. So um, it's because they came up with an original theory, you know, to treat trauma and PTSD. And I thought it was, I think, I don't know, resonated with me. I think they included a lot of ideas from other theorists that, you know, they really didn't give enough credit to. Um, but it does have some points that I'd like to share with you. I think they're pertinent to this class and you know things that I would use, or incorporate personally. And I like the way they write about some of the terminology. So just when they're talking about crisis versus trauma, okay? So a crisis is often an immediate, unpredictable event that occurs in people's lives, such as receiving a threatening medical diagnosis, experiencing a miscarriage, or undergoing divorce. That can overwhelm the ways that people naturally cope. People can experience crisis individually or as part of a larger group, community, or other connected systems. Crises can also interfere with a person's ability to function in the world by negatively affecting several life domains like work, family, social connections. But um, a crisis can also exacerbate existing emotions or issues. Trauma is different than crisis. Trauma involves an emotional, mental, and physical response to a powerfully negative experience or series of situations in which people perceived that they or a loved one experienced serious psychological, physical, or emotional harm. So, crisis is an event that affects us emotionally. Trauma is an emotional response. Not every crisis results in trauma. So it's slightly different, but this class is on both crisis and trauma. And that's why, I'd like to kind of denote the difference between the two. Um, Although crises tend to resolve over time, people undergoing trauma may continually experience flashbacks and other debilitating symptoms such as nightmares, as well as physical, emotional, spiritual, or social concerns. Trauma can also result in a pattern of acute anxiety, depression, or post traumatic stress. So that's kind of the symptomology of trauma. And, so one thing they talk about is trauma-informed care. We're going to have a whole class on that. Um, one of my friends, Mark Lepore, he's also a professor here. He wrote the new SAMHSA uh, handbook, and yeah, so maybe I'll link to that when we talk about trauma-informed care. Um, so the publishers of this textbook really talk about a theory, which is fairly new, by Jean Baker Miller, and it's called relational cultural theory. And so let's see. Um, Miller, 1976, discussed how these clinical models emphasize separation from others as key human development in response, she documented what she saw as the undervalued yet indisputable relational strengths of women in her book, Toward a New Psychology of Women, Miller, 1976, which was a pretty revolutionary book, you know. But relational RCT, relational cultural theory, is an outgrowth of that concept. And, it's all about relationships, authenticity, relational neuroscience. You see a trend with the word relational here. Um, and Women are one of the highest groups that are misdiagnosed when in reality they experience trauma, but they're misdiagnosed for other symptomology. Children, also a large group. Um, so we're going to, as we move through this course, I'm usually going to include some part of this theory if we're talking about different theories. So think for a minute to a time when you experienced an event that was outside of your control, an experience that may have felt like a punch to the stomach or an unexpected turn of events that some would consider debilitating. And my response to this is, using this theory would be, how might a therapist help you to feel safe and heard when recalling that instance? Validated. And she has some quotes in here. The Dalai Lama was quoted as saying, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Now, I think that one of the terms she uses is called responsiveness and anticipatory empathy. And, you know, I think this is a great theory, but I do think they should have given some credit to some earlier theorists like, Carl Rogers and his daughter, Natalie Rogers. And so when we think about these things, we think about accurate empathic understanding, we think about unconditional positive regard and acceptance, think about genuineness and authenticity. Those are the three primary components of person-centered therapy. His daughter, Natalie Rogers, was one of the first people to write a book on expressive arts therapy that included art, music, drumming, meditation, all kinds of different aspects of within the expressive arts therapy realm. One of the things that I think is important to realize is that before we use any of these theories to help an individual with crisis or trauma, is we have to help the individual to meet those first level of basic needs by Maslow. So, safety, number one, safety, food, shelter, clothing. So let me give you an example of that. So whenever I go to a crisis situation with the Red Cross, um, usually first responders are there to take care of whether it's a fire or an earthquake or a flood. But, you know, the Red Cross realizes this, and the first thing we do is respond to those basic needs. So even if it's a fire, one of the first things we give them is a Red Cross blanket. And so it might not be cold, but it is a comforting thing. It is something that helps an individual to feel safe and cared for. And so, um, my wife joined this organization. I forget what it's called. My wife knits and crochets and does needlepoint a lot. Um, and so this organization takes donations for handmade blankets of all different sizes for all different ages. And we just ship boxes to natural disasters of these handmade blankets. And, yeah, it's for warmth and they might not have a blanket, but it's also, a handmade blanket shows that somebody cares. And it's one of those basic things in life. And, I just think it's kind of a loving thing to do, um, so that somebody out there doesn't feel alone in the world. And, it's thinking about these little things in life that, we have to help. People can't work on their emotional needs unless all of these basic needs are met first. If they're trying to find a place to live, or, you know, uh, if they don't have enough to eat, you know, even when I was a school counselor, if I knew that a child was uh, not eating their free lunch and saving most of it to take home to their younger siblings who weren't in school, you know, I would help them meet those basic needs as a family because, you know, we can't address how can somebody be successful in other domains unless those basic needs are met first? How do children meet those basic needs during the summer? You know? So I think it's important to realize that as a therapist. Basic needs have to be met first before we can deal with emotional needs. Um, Another thing to consider during crises or disasters would be like um, chronic media exposure, you know? Um, I think that all of these things influence our emotional well-being. Um, so if you just think about media exposure to 9/11 and the World Trade Center disasters, I think that I remember, um, volunteering for the Red Cross at that point. Mark went to New York. I went to um, some of the colleges that I was working with to talk with the students who had relatives in New York City. And, but just watching the videos of that tragedy over and over again impacted individuals emotionally, whether they knew somebody or didn't, you know. Um, when we think about first responders or volunteers, and you might be, part of that, you might be included in that group when you're talking with victims. We have to consider secondary trauma, or what we might call vicarious trauma. Hearing what happened to other individuals can definitely affect us. And, we'll have a class on how to deal with that. Um, I think that um, there's a lot of emerging research. See what else I want to share. So I think that um, both books talk about either numbing or disconnection. Um, and it reminds me a lot of kind of attachment theory as well, or, systems theory. Um, I think next time we might talk about kind of Gestalt and the layers of personality, um, irrational thoughts that come along that are added to trauma or crisis. Um, so a lot of people talk about CBT, and I think that everybody has irrational thoughts at some point. And I think that trauma or crises uh, can trigger more irrational thoughts. Um, I also like REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. I like that better than CBT. It actually came out slightly before Albert Ellis came out with it slightly before Beck, but they were really contemporaries. I never heard whether they argued or liked each other or, because their theories are so similar. But I like REBT because it uses the ABCDEF technique. Um, and we'll talk about that. But there is an exercise that I'm having you do for your discussion board, and it asks you about the chapters you've read, this first two chapters in The Body Keeps the Score, but it also is an exercise about kind of um, being authentic, being ourselves, or changing who we are so that we can fit in and be accepted. If we change who we are to be accepted, it's because we fear rejection. And I think everybody does fear rejection to some degree. Um, and if you just think back to high school, and you walk in a school cafeteria and look around, where am I going to sit in the school cafeteria? Um, there's all kinds of different groups at different tables, you know. Um, there's people wearing leather jackets and the people wearing letter jackets and, people wearing fashionable clothing, and that's just clothing. Um, so I think that everybody changes in some way to be accepted by others. But it combines kind of this Gestalt idea of the layers of the personality with um, kind of like being genuine and, uh, kind of the Rogerian perspective and not wanting to be rejected, you know. Um, so that's what the exercise is about. And you're going to have uh, two blank ovals, which are kind of like two blank faces. Okay. And I uploaded examples. I did the exercise too, so you can see what I did. And I'll explain it next week when we go over the exercise. I'll explain my faces to you. And one face looks at all of the different ways we've changed ourselves in order to fit in. We change ourselves to get a good grade. We change ourselves, it's kind of like conditional acceptance versus unconditional acceptance. We all deserve to be loved and accepted for who we truly are, whoever that might be. Um, but we've learned throughout our lives that we have to meet other people's expectations in order to be accepted by them. And so we change. If a parent liked football or sport or whatever it might be, we're probably going to work on that because we might not be rejected, but we are enthusiastically cheered if we do well in a certain area. It might not be a sport, it might be academics. It might be being popular. Who knows what it might be? Um, you know, but uh, everybody has something. Uh, so, we are steered by acceptance. Imagine who we would be if we were just accepted for who we are from the beginning. So that's kind of what this exercise is. Who is the genuine, real you? Who's the you that you show the world? Well, sometimes people expect me to always be happy, so I drew a smile on my face. But on the other face, well, I'm not always happy. It's okay to experience the full range of emotions. We have all those emotions for a reason. So that's just one example, you know. Um, Moving from kind of well, you need to have a good job and make money. Money is, important, to learning that no, money is kind of like, you know, uh, an illusion, basically. It has no real value. Our real commodity is time and how we spend it. So think about it this way: how do we spend our time? Because that is our greatest commodity. So that's another example of something I put on the faces, on my faces. But you get the idea, you know? So think about it yourself. Take your time, you know? Uh, and then we'll talk about these different theories and how they might apply to treating trauma and crisis and acceptance and, all of that. Um, yeah. And if you have any questions about the exercise, you could email me. But keep it simple, you know, keep it basic. Um, you know. So yeah, I think that's enough for tonight. Any questions or comments before we wrap it up? All right. I will see you all next week. Thanks for coming.